Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson. On this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Today, we have Ryann Edwards joining us. Ryann is the Senior Director of Service Operations at Aquiva Labs. She has spent her career in technology professional services, starting in project management and then moving into resource management, where she has been focused for the last 12 years, while also expanding into service roles and functions. In her current role, Ryann is responsible for multiple aspects of service delivery, including Aquiva Labs Resource Management Office, Project Management Office, and Revenue Operations. Ryan's focus has been on optimizing service delivery functions and processes to support and enhance employee and customer experiences, and leveraging data to drive strategic workforce planning initiatives. Ryann is project management and resource management certified. Ryann, it is so great having you with us today.
So nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to jump right in. And it's funny, for our listeners, right before we got started, Ryann and I were just commiserating on the fact that we have run into each other. Our paths have crossed a couple of times. And funny enough, we actually met in an airport. Do you remember that?
I do. I did at the airport.
Yeah. And we met after, I think it was the first RMGS that we attended together, yes, which was fun. And then we actually spoke on a panel together and have crossed paths within the resource management space, which is somewhat of a small world for anyone who knows the space. So With that, let's go ahead and dive right in. Ryann, can you tell us about how you actually got started in the resource management world? This is always interesting to hear.
Yes. And I feel like my story is funny because at the time I was a project manager, and the idea of centralized resource management was really not a thing at the time. So we're talking, almost 13 years ago. And I happen to know that because I was on maternity leave when this all started with my own daughter. So we had talked about it because we had a large team of project managers, no centralized scheduling, and all of the things that happen along with not having a formalized resourcing process were happening to us at the time. So we were getting extremely busy in our services organization. We were intentionally growing. We were running into each other in all the different areas of trying to schedule engagements, to the point where at the time we used a lot of service providers, and we had a provider, a partner who we used often, who we would reach out to on our own. So, imagine it now. It's hard to even imagine now a project manager calling a service provider or reaching out to a practice manager and saying, I need a resource for my project, to where our partner was like, are you guys even talking to each other? Because no, you can't have this resource. Your friend has this resource. Your other project manager has this resource. What are you guys doing? So all of the things that, like I said, that can happen when resourcing is not streamlined or organized was happening. So as we started to grow, we started to have this conversation about, should we have one person or one function who manages all of our resources, both internal and external, with our partners, and sort of organizes that. And they're, at the time we were talking about, they're sort of the gatekeeper of the resources, and they figure out who should go where, and they kind of handle these little conflicts that we're having between PMs and between our partners. And, but again, at the time, we didn't really know where to go with that. So it was just a conversation. And again, while I was on maternity leave, I got a phone call from my manager at the time who said, all right, so we have been thinking about this a bit more. Would you be interested when you come back in giving this a shot and just seeing what it looks like? And so I thought about it, and I wasn't, it was pretty early in my career. And so I thought, well, do I want to stay in project management? Do I want to branch out and learn new things? I was immediately interested in the idea of resource management, but no clue what it looked like. So I said yes, and came back and just started to dive into, what does this mean? What do I do? Where do I start? And I guess I'll stop there. That's the very beginning of the story.
I love that. And it's so interesting to hear, because resource management is funny industry in that there isn't a very formal and a very specific career path that people follow,
Yeah.
especially entering resource management. Perhaps that's different once you're in the field, right? And people start to
Yeah.
carve that out. But I love hearing how folks kind of ended up in this space because it's a different story every time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, I think sometimes it's the one thing that is a common thread is, hey, I just kind of fell into this, like this popped up and it piqued my interest. So there's something to be said about the personality of resource managers there, right? In terms of just jumping right in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially before, the RMI and all of these awesome things that we have today, all of these best practices, even especially prior to that, because again, there was no real career path. There was no formal job descriptions or career centered around it. So a lot of it, I think those of us who have been doing it for years really just had to jump right in and be experimental and figure out where we could help and what we were going to do.
Absolutely. And to be honest, that's how I felt, as well. And I would venture to say many of us that were coming into this field. How did that feel at the time? Was it nerve-wracking? Was it scary? Or did you feel comfortable doing that?
Well, I felt comfortable. I felt really excited. And I think mostly because, like I said, I was on the other side of it. So I had been experiencing the negative aspect of not having an RMO and a resource manager, resource specialist, whatever, we called it at the time. I was ready to solve that problem. And so for me in that time, it was really, really exciting, although of course, overwhelming, not expected, just like I said, some conversations, but I was ready. Yeah, I was excited when I think back on it.
I love that. And I would imagine too that that's somewhat of if you had to come up with the profile of a resource manager, that's part of it is this problem solving. We get excited by problems. Maybe some people would think that's weird, but we like it. We like problems. We like to solve put together the puzzle pieces. Now, I'd like to kind of back up because something that I think is super fascinating about resource management is that I am always positively surprised, but surprised whenever I learn about a new industry that is thinking about implementing resource management. And so I'll tell you something that is probably somewhat comical to you coming from your background. But for me, I grew up in resource management in the accounting and consulting industry.
Yes.
And truthfully, it never even occurred to me that it existed out of that industry, right? And so when I started to get involved more in the resource management space and trying to network, I was like, there's resource management in other places? Like, what do you mean there's resource management in IT? Can you tell us about that? Did you feel that way too? Were you aware? And what was your experience like?
I definitely felt that way. I would have never thought of resource management outside of IT professional services, to be honest. And I think it even took probably being at my first, either the RMCP certification class or the first symposium, where I met people and heard from people in all of these other industries, where I've realized I had that aha moment that you had, where I realized how it can really transcend industries. I mean, it really does fit in any type of, services, really, any type of industry where people are the foundation of the company and the industry. I definitely had that same aha moment as you did.
Couldn't agree more. I've certainly experienced that myself. I strongly experienced that the first time that I attended a resource management event. And as a side note, we did have a recent event called Elevate in the UK where we brought together a number of resource managers, and it was really cool to witness that happening with other people and hear that excitement. And that is actually so interesting too, because part of what I have seen and certainly that I've experienced is resource managers really like resource management.
Yeah.
And I think they have to like resource management because it is such a challenging profession that if you don't like it, you'd probably be pretty miserable.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious then, Ryann, what do you like about it? Has it changed over time, or what was what drew you to it in the first place?
Well, we already touched on it a little bit, but it was really that problem solving aspect of it. So in what I was as I mentioned, I was a project manager before moving into resource management, and that does have a lot of satisfaction around it, job satisfaction around it on an individual project basis. So that I was happy there, and that problem solving just felt a little bit different. So once I got into resource management and realized that there were whole functions of the organization that I could contribute to positively and make change toward, felt just bigger to me. It felt like I don't have to wait for my next project, or I don't have to, really dive into one specific engagement and spend all of my time on this. I can really branch out into many different areas and fix things that need to be fixed that, maybe we didn't even realize at the time that there were all of these optimizations that we could do in all of these different areas that directly affected our bottom line, to be honest. The billable utilization, solving that, the visibility into our teams, all of those things, it just felt a little bit bigger to me. It felt like I was able to expand and really solve those business problems that, a lot of people hadn't really thought of yet.
Yeah, you just said something really interesting. So we've had a number of guests on that have talked about, of course, resource management. This is our topic.
Yeah.
And what they like about it, what the challenges are. But I really love what you just said around this concept of branching out. And I think you articulated it in a way that probably many of us are feeling, but we maybe have not used those words. So I want to highlight that for everyone who's listening. There is something about resource management that in order to perform and execute in a resource management role, and especially in a resource management leadership role, you have to branch out. You have to touch other areas. You have to understand who the end client is.
Yes.
And I love that word that you used related to optimization, because everything can be improved. And when you think about all of the cogs in the wheel, whatever that expression is, resource management is a huge factor in that. And the better that the resource management process works, the better downstream, effects that has, on other things. So I think that's actually a really interesting concept that I'm gonna note that, because as we have guests in the future, I want to think more about that. So you mentioned your project management experience first. How has that evolved? So you're in a different role now. So certainly you still have resource management under your umbrella. How has your resource management experience helped you, or did your resource management experience help you land the role that you're in today? What is that all about?
No question. And it hits on exactly what you just talked about. So there are so many cogs in the wheel, as you said. There are so many pieces, and especially I speak specifically to professional services, and, I've been in technology organizations, but I'm positive this applies in many different organizations and industries. If you think about some of the things that resource managers are doing and reporting on, again, there's billable utilization. That is a really important piece of a business, especially professional services business. So you're interacting with the people at a level who really need to know how billable is our team. If they were more billable, what would that look like? If they were less billable, what would that look like? And where do we have these pockets of maybe teams or people who are consistently less billable than others? And it's the workforce planning, basically, is what I'm getting at. It might feel at the beginning like you're just looking at numbers and you're looking at these reports and percentages, but what you're doing is you're providing really key information to a business that they're going to use to make decisions. And so while it might feel like just another task that you're working on, it actually is very important. And then if you look at, say, forecasting, for example, you have to interact with sales. You're forecasting based on sales data. Well, depending on where you're at in your career and where your organization is at related to maturity, you don't always get handed a nice little package of sales data. So there's a back and forth there, and there's an integration in what do I need from you in order to be able to forecast this data to leadership or management or wherever it's going at the time. And that can turn into this operational collaboration where you may have some recommendations. Hey, what if we try this? Or, this CRM that we're using isn't quite working. It's not giving us the data that we need. Let's talk about the input data and how we're using it. And maybe that will complement your needs on the sales side, on the front end of the business. So it's that collaboration, and it's the, looking at these different areas that just naturally fall into resource management, but branch out into so many different areas and actually can end up helping other people. The other part of it that I would highlight, we talk about a lot in the resource management community about technology and how we're using technology to really enhance the resource management functions. Well, those generally aren't just resource management technologies. They're most of the time full-blown professional services automation tools. So you look at, you really have an opportunity to become a subject matter expert on these types of tools. And this is my experience. This is some of the ways that my role really branched out because, we're implementing PSA. So we're working with technologists, solution architects, we're working with project managers, we're working with management and leadership. And so you have an opportunity there to also sort of highlight some areas that you think can be improved and work together to find these solutions that work for multiple departments and that you can build upon. So in my opinion and in my experience, there is a natural way to branch out into other roles outside of resource management if that is your chosen path.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'd like to dig in a little bit into something that you described, which was this idea of making recommendations and making suggestions. And the reason I like to think about that a bit more is it seems that there is a natural point of pivot in the career of a resource manager where, so first off, you're not necessarily receiving super formal training. And I think the profession is evolving in a very good way around that. But the reality is, generally speaking, you're kind of thrown into it. You're learning on the job. Even if you're part of a more established resource management team, every scenario is different, right? And it's more of an art sometimes than a science. So that being said, you spend the first part of your career learning and sort of experimenting. Yes. And what I have seen, I'm curious, Ryan, your perspective, is that the ones who are really successful are those resource managers that exhibit that ability and demonstrate that they have a point of view, they have a perspective. Hey, I looked at this information and here's my recommendation. Now, that observation alone is not enough to elevate the profession. I have found that there is, you have to have a level of confidence in order to then make those suggestions. Talk to us about that. Was that an easy transition for you? Did you feel comfortable doing that? And what do you have to say for those resource managers that are like, yeah, but these people are really senior, I'm just going to give them the report. And, if they ask me a question, I'll answer it, but I'm not really sure if I should be, coming to them with recommendations. What do you have to say about that?
Great question. Was it comfortable for me? Absolutely not. No way. But you have to, if you want to elevate yourself in your role, it's one of those areas of discomfort that you really sort of have to just push through. Now, it does get easier as you get more and more confident in not only your role, but your data. So data is really the key here because you can provide all of the recommendations that you want based on your opinion, but those don't go very far. So what I think really helped me and what I would recommend is the best way to get comfortable and confident is to have as much organized data that you trust, that came from a good place, that you have your head into, that you understand, that you can articulate. And the result of that analysis and that data, that's where you get your confidence from because numbers don't lie and, data doesn't lie. And so I think the more and more you do it, the more confident that you get. But again, you really need to make sure that you're looking in the right areas in terms of data. So if you're building, for example, a utilization report, Are you getting the input data from time entry? And if so, how accurate is it? This is another area where you can sort of branch out. Have you put together a process for these potential, for these delivery resources, for your pool of resources? Do they even know how to enter time? Are you rolling out a new system? So things like that, there may be some work to get to the right data. But let's say that you get to that point where you have it and you're comfortable and you feel like you can make a recommendation. From there, that's where sort of that discomfort, just pushing through that discomfort comes in, because I very much was in that place where I would provide reports. If I was asked questions, I would answer them, but I wouldn't necessarily offer up recommendations because it was so early and it was so new and I wasn't sure if anybody would want to hear it or if it was going to matter. And so that really, again, just evolves over time. And we've had this conversation about getting resource managers getting a seat at the table. I was thinking about this as I was, preparing for this conversation today. There was a time where I would provide reports to people who would then bring those reports into a meeting and do their own analysis and put their own narrative around it. And questions would come out of it either during the meeting or after the meeting. This doesn't make sense. What is this? Nobody understood this. Well, how about I just come to the meeting? Because then I can just explain exactly what I'm doing and exactly what we're talking about. And so that was a game changer, because then you're in the room and then you're hearing more and more of the problem statement, and you're prepared because you've been compiling this data in whatever way that comes in. You've worked on some of these processes that need to be put in place to provide that essential data. And then you're in the room and you can start to work on your confidence and you can start to provide these valuable recommendations. And I think that's a huge starting point to having the resource management have this credible perspective and become more strategic versus, we're just scheduling resources. We're just, somebody's telling us who to schedule and we're scheduling and we don't really, have any sort of strategy around it. So that's where you can sort of prove it. And I feel like that can be one way to evolve into that role.
And now a word about our sponsors, Dayshape. Do you ever feel like your team spends more time managing spreadsheets than getting actual work done? If you're a strategic leader in a professional services firm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Say goodbye to the chaos with Dayshape. Dayshape is an AI-powered platform that takes the stress out of resource management. Imagine scheduling, planning, and staffing all being handled in one smart system that actually understands your business. Sounds too good to be true? Believe me, I dreamt of having this type of technology when I was a resource management leader. It's like having a superpower for your firm, boosting productivity, profitability, and even employee happiness. Plus, it seamlessly integrates with your existing tools, so there's zero disruption. Do you want to see the magic in action? Check out dayshape.com and see how your resource management function can be elevated to a more strategic position. Trust me, your team and your CEO will thank you. I think one of the things that you said that really resonated with me was the word credibility, because credibility builds more credibility. There's a saying. So I'm the parent of a couple little kids, and I've heard this saying from a parenting perspective, sleep begets more sleep for anyone who's ever had newborns. And it's the same thing for resource managers. It's credibility builds more credibility. The more that you are present, the more that you have a point of view. And by the way, the more that you're informed with good data, the more you actually feel confident to attend more meetings and speak up more, right? So look, it's know your audience, it's read the room, but it's also don't allow yourself to miss the opportunity to attend a meeting and actually have a perspective. Look, if you're there is an expectation that you are at a minimum retaining the information, right? And taking that back and doing something with it. So I love that. The other thing that you said that I think is really huge, and I noted this too, is data equals confidence, right? So arm yourself with that data, and that is really important. I'd like to highlight also something that stuck out for me in what Ryann just described, there is this idea of, and we talk about this a lot in the RM world, of having a seat at the table and getting a seat at the table and how to do that. And there are a number of tips around that, and certainly resources, even outside of the resource management community, that you can leverage. But I'd offer another perspective, which is also take action and take your seat at the table. And that's really what Ryann just described, right? It's, generally speaking, people want to improve the operations of their business. Leadership is interested in having things work better. So if you have a perspective, and especially reframing your own view of, oh, well, they just asked me to run a report. Maybe they did just ask you to run a report, but you know what? So did every other part of the business. And so you have a more global perspective around what's going on. Because if you're taking that next step to analyze, as you just described, that information, you can, at a minimum, provide insight and provide perspective around trends that are happening in the organization, things that you're seeing. If you're connected with other resource managers, even outside of your business, but within the same industry, you can talk about that and give perspective around things like utilization, or people that are leaving the profession, for this reason or the other. So, as you can probably tell, very energized about this topic, because I think it is one of the key areas where resource managers can add value. You touched upon technology. This is technology, data. This is what empowers the resource manager to deliver and really to show that value proposition of RM. So that being said, I find something really, really interesting, Ryann, about your background. So we've talked about your resource management experience. We certainly, there's some key tie-ins, right, from a project management piece. Talk to us about revenue operations. What does that mean? Is that a completely separate thing? How does that tie into resource management? What does that mean? And what does that, dissect that for us?
Yeah. Well, I think it all ties in together if you think about service delivery and overall service operations. So I think this is one of the areas that we can highlight as, an evolution outside as you start to sort of elevate in the resource management and then decide which way you want to go. So for me, it's the overall operations of a services organization. And it all started with resource management. It was, getting this seat at the table and providing recommendations and finding these little areas of the business where potentially we could collaborate and improve some things. So for me right now, what that means is I'm also involved in sales operations currently. So all facets of that. So lead management, forecasting. So I move beyond resource management, resource forecasting, more into revenue forecasting, responsible for overall invoicing. And so it really is the operational piece from beginning to end. So it's, again, forecasting, sales operations, the service delivery governance from a PM and RM perspective, and then moving through the process into actual, contracting and invoicing. So I thought it was important to add that piece in. There are a lot of different functions within my current role and within service operations that I touch in one way or another, but I did want to highlight that one because I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but there are so many opportunities once you're in a resource management role. You cannot work in a silo. If you wanted to work in a silo, you cannot be a resource manager. So again, that's why I wanted to highlight those three of the, I would say, bigger functions of my current role, because it's up to you as a resource manager which direction you want to go in. And maybe it's operations, which is basically everything, or maybe it's, the project management aspect of it. Maybe it's sales operations. I never would have imagined that I would be invested in sales operations, but they go so hand in hand when you look at resource forecasting, revenue forecasting, and data, and, again, all the way to invoicing. So that's what that piece was.
Yeah. And that's just it. So you touched upon this idea of, I love this. I think the theme for this episode is going to be, hashtag branching out, because that is what you've done so well from a career path perspective. And part of it is resource managers likely have a sense that their job and their role touches these different areas, right? Because they're interacting with a number of different stakeholders. What I think is missing is guidance around, well, has this been done before? Has someone actually transitioned into this type of role? And maybe it's not a formal lateral move or it's a promotion, but there's a high level of job satisfaction that comes with expanding your own purview and really using that to enhance whether that's your current role or maybe a future role. So you touched upon that, and I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I think goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, is we've, as a community and as a profession, have been butting up against this perception of resource management as an administrative function for a long time. And it's something that the more eager, I would say, of the bunch have been really trying to actively tackle and change the perception around. A really good way of doing that is changing your language and the language that you use around what the impact is that resource management is having. So I love this revenue operations concept, Ryan, that you brought out, because I would venture to say that a number of resource managers actually do already touch upon those pieces, but are they calling it revenue operations? Probably not. So I'd like to highlight that and really encourage the RMs to look, give yourself credit where it's due. If you're doing this type of work, lean into that and talk more about that. And again, going back to the idea of having a point of view and having a perspective, it all goes hand in hand. So I really like that. Speaking of this idea around multiple different things coming together, right? And you touched upon this, certainly from your experience, but also you have had the opportunity to have formal certifications, both in project management and in resource management. Some of our listeners are RMCPs. Others are just now hearing of the RMI for the first time, are thinking about, hey, there's this RMCP thing. What is that? Tell us about that training. Is that something that you currently leverage even today?
Yes, that training was a game changer for me. So I have never forgotten the principles and the best practices that I learned in that training. And I'm not just saying this. I mentioned it on the RMI Connect, one of the panels that I spoke on a few weeks ago. I had the binder from the training that I literally had, like, my keyboard, then the binder, and I was flipping through as I was building processes for our non-existent RMO at the time. That training is what gave me more confidence to realize that we can build something here that is going to be strategic. And there are so many, I had a million aha moments while I was going through that training. I took so many of those practices that I learned and applied it to what we were doing at the time, and still today. So, as I transitioned into a new organization, there were some things that I learned there that we put into practice, even as recently as, a year ago here. So, and bringing on new resource managers as well, and sort of pivoting people's roles into more of the resource management. I'm still using that training. So I'm pointing them to the RMI website. I'm pointing them to the white papers and the conferences and the webinars, because it is so valuable, in my opinion, to resource management as a whole. I think I'm trying to think of the last example of probably our skills. So building out skills inventory, technology. So, people are always evaluating, do we have the right system? Is it giving us what we need? I often use tips from the RMCP training that help with those requirements gathering and the outputs. And, yes.
I love that.
I used it at the time. It helped me pivot into, I don't know if I mentioned this specifically, but that very first role, the title was resource specialist, because we didn't know a resource manager was a thing or an RMO was a thing. And that class and that training helped me really pivot from the administrative role of taking, essentially what people were telling me was a good idea in terms of resourcing, and really flipping that on its head to where I was the one making the recommendations. And we were, adding all these processes and best practices that kept working. And so, if we had put one into place and it was meh, who knows where we would have gone from there. But it was one after another, was just, they were continuing to just provide value and continue to add to that confidence level. So I get passionate about the certification and the class and the RMI because, it was a total game changer. Still use it today. Absolutely love the organization and what
That's fantastic. I think that was really well said. And I would add to that, for those who are in the position, I know you're out there, where, to use Ryan's word, it's like, is this even a thing? I have encountered that many times in my own career. And I think we probably all have at some point. It's a thing. It's real. And we touched upon this concept of confidence. So there's the technical part of resource management. There's staffing strategies. There's best practices. There's, you touched upon skills, right? There's a whole lot of information around there. But the other thing that I would almost say is just as important is having that confidence and having the ability to demonstrate the fact that you're coming prepared. And by the way, you know what you're talking about in this space. Yes. Having that training helps you with that. Yes. Because there is just something about, and going back to that idea that we opened with around credibility, there's something about, you know what? This is actually something that's going on in the industry. Here's some research to back this point up. Here's what other large organizations have done in our space around, let's say, skill set, evaluation and skill set inventory. At the last conference for resource management, I heard these are the top three trends that we could be focusing on. There is a natural boost and energy that comes from that I can't think of anything that would match that. So something to think about, something to, really think about. Now, that said, as we wrap up our line of questioning, and we talked about quite a few things here, but do you have any advice? What would you share for someone in the resource management space who is curious in particular about those other career paths in the future? Maybe they're really happy in their role today, but they're seeing, people like you and they're thinking, that's kind of interesting. How would they begin to explore some of that?
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier. The first is look for those opportunities to get in the room or to get on the call. And even if you think that you may not have something to contribute at the time, you're learning. So even if, any opportunity that you have to get into another call, and if that's related to sales and forecasting, if that's related to something more technical with your solutions team, who knows? If you are in the room interacting with these other functional departments in your organization, there will be something related to resource management that you could tie back. So that may be, again, the sales process into resource management. It could be the technical team and the delivery team into resource management. It could be a broken process that you might find related to the actual delivery process and how time is being entered, or a lack of viable systems that aren't giving you the data that you need. You just being in the room and hearing these challenges that resource managers love to solve will help give you these ideas of, maybe this would be cool to work on, maybe that would be cool to work on. And then my advice would be to raise your hand from there. Now, we do have to be careful because there is the common misperception, like you said, that resource managers are an administrative role. So there is one thing I would caution against, and that's taking things just to take things, meaning, some sort of workflow or some sort of process optimization that, leads, that may just be adding things to your plate. So try to be strategic about where you're headed and what you're taking on. But if it's something that you're interested in, it could potentially lead to you, again, branching out into other areas and learning more, then by all means, I would take it. I would get involved, raise your hand and figure out where you might be able to help, because the more you start looking, the more you can find all of these little problem areas that and this is not a negative thing, but everybody has their own role and they all have their own mandate and they're focused on certain things. And there are some things that just maybe nobody's thinking about or that are slipping through the cracks. And the more that you can identify those things and solve those problems, if it's something that you're interested in, the sky really is the limit from there.
Absolutely. Really, really sage advice. And so I would say, I love that. It's raise your hand, get involved, but be smart about what you're getting involved with too, right? Use a little bit of professional skepticism as you're getting involved in these areas. So branch out, but branch out wisely is my takeaway from that. I love that. Thank you, Ryann. I would like to now pivot into a new part of our podcast. So this is the first time that we're doing this. Ryann is our guinea pig. We're going to move into a segment called Resource Management Would You Rather? So Ryann has not heard these questions before, and essentially going to put two different situations in front of you, and you tell us which would you rather pick. Okay. First one. You ready?
Ready.
Okay. Would you rather be asked to fill a resource need last minute, or be put on the spot to explain a utilization variance?
Ooh. I think the latter. I think the utilization variance, because again, we're talking about facts at that point, and you can solve. That's something you can fix. That's something you can solve. That's something you can explain. Finding resources last minute. I mean, hey, we all know it can be a nightmare. It's scary. It's frustrating. It's anxiety inducing. So if I had a choice, I would rather explain the utilization dip all day long.
Awesome. Spoken like a true resource manager that likes the analysis. There's definitely a group of you guys out there for sure.
Guilty.
Next question. Would you rather retest for the RMCP or relive your first 5 years learning the RM function?
Ooh, that's a good one. These are tough. I think I'd rather retest. Yeah, I think so. I think the first 5 years, I don't know that I would do anything different, but I don't also know that I want to relive that at the moment. So I think I would retest.
Very cool. You know, if they gave me that test again today, I wonder how I'd score. That would be an interesting one. Last question. Would you rather get on stage in front of an audience of 5,000 resource managers or secure buy-in for resource management in a room of 5 very skeptical senior leaders?
The latter at this point. Now, if you had asked me that a few years ago, I think I would rather be in the company of 5,000 resource managers than 5 skeptical managers that I need to sell something to. At this point, I feel like I could sell it. So I'm going to take the hard road on this one, and I'm going to try to sell RM.
Fantastic. Love it. Love it. And that's exciting, right? Because this is what people need to hear. There is a point in time where you will feel comfortable going into a room with 5 or more skeptical stakeholders. And I think anyone who's been in a resource management leadership position has had to deal with this, not just in theory, but actually quite real scenarios for sure.
For sure.
That being said, Ryann, it has been awesome talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and sharing your perspective and advice with us. And with that, we will wrap up our conversation. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to hear more of our episodes.